who doesn't? Anybody who normally doesn't show up? Jason, are you, do you normally show up to these? You want to introduce yourself?
I went to one before Christmas break and I've been out for 3 weeks instead. So I will be, yes.
Got it. Maybe I just haven't seen you. All right. Next up on the list is release planning and updates. You have Javier or Emily.
I could start it off. For pack, there are 2 issues or 2 PRs, sorry, that are going to be merged in, and the hope is to have, I believe it's 0.16.0 go into release candidate, so code freeze, and the release itself going out next week.
On the lifecycle side, we released 0.10.0 and 0.10.1 right before the holidays. And now I'm starting to gear up for the next big release, 0.11, which will implement the 0.6 versions of the APIs, which are not fully finalized yet. So it's going to be some time before the next big one comes out.
What are the highlights of 0.10?
0.10 implements platform API 0.5 and Buildpack API 0.5. Some of the highlights are the inclusion of execd, which allows for direct processes to have runtime dependent environment variable set up. And also some of our other improvements, like to the decoupling the build plan from the bill of materials, to make that more obvious for folks, and some small things like adding homepage to report, to labels, stuff like that. I'm not sure if I remember all of that, but those are the big ones that I can remember right now.
Great.
Any more questions on release planning? And we'll move to RFC review. 1 second to share my screen. Everybody see that? Awesome. 132 is a draft, so we'll skip it. 129 RFC group additions to builder order.
I'll put it on the agenda for today.
Got it.
Can we Sherpa it, please?
Yeah, so I wasn't sure. It's kind of crosses Project TOML and Pack, so I wasn't sure if that's platform. I also saw a project. I wasn't sure if that was meant to be like Meta, the project, or like Project TOML. I don't think it's Project TOML.
That is not a valid label for us to assign a Sherpa either.
Okay. I would suggest platform, but I just didn't want to go ahead and do it yet. So
sounds good. Platform, and then now we have all these other labels too. Do I need to select an audience or something? Are we just doing?
I think just calling it platform is sufficient.
Oh, the spec. Does it affect the spec? That was one thing, right?
Yeah,
Project
spec extension,
descriptor,
which is a spec extension. So I think, oh, there's spec extension. There you go.
Spec extensions, bindings, builder,
Keep scrolling.
Project descriptor.
Project descriptor. Okay, I knew there was one more. There we go. All right, and then we'll come back to that on the agenda. And 128 life cycle configuration file.
Yeah, I brought this one up right before the break. We had a good discussion on it. I know Joe's already commented some stuff on there, so I guess we can either add it to the agenda or just look in your own time async on, getting some feedback on this to ensure it up.
Do you want to add it to the agenda, or do you want to give like a
there? Yeah.
Cool?
Also need to do tagging.
Yeah, let's see. So this is, I'm guessing, is a lifecycle descriptor file. Is it different than the existing one?
Yeah, it's basically just another way to set invars for lifecycle to read from, but in a file.
We already have a lifecycle toml that lives next to lifecycle in the distribution artifact, I think.
Okay,
don't we?
well, maybe it's a bad name. Oh.
I don't know. I got confused based on maybe it's called something else. I forget. And then so platform and what else do we say?
I would say it's implementation rather than platform, probably.
Yeah, sorry.
But
That
it
makes
affects the platform API. So like spec platform. That's probably what Jesse meant.
All right. We'll talk about that later. And did it work? Yeah, there we go. Add new build pack descriptor keys RFC.
Yeah, I put this on the agenda, but we did already discuss it. I think it's just waiting for some core team votes and review, I guess.
Cool. This is just adds top level, more things.
Yeah, I
Cool.
think 3 keys that support Buildpack registry.
Got it. That would go in the spec, right? Does that need a spec label?
Yeah, I guess so.
Like build pack.
Not the Buildpack registry, but yeah, there.
Cool. And CNB user research. This is Sam. Do we have Sam on the call this time? Does anybody have any updates on this one? Knowledge of this one?
No, but I will take a note to go get that back. Get
Probably.
it into show back up.
Awesome. Yeah, add core team to that too. RFC for Buildpack registry search API. And final comment period. This
I think
just needs
that's
to go
ready
in,
to
right?
merge. Mhm.
Yeah, and that's on you, Joe, to open up those spec issues that relate to it, and then use the merge script to identify everything.
Awesome. RFC creates Stackify repo. Do we have Marty here or anybody from his team? Does anybody know about status of this one? This does not affect the spec. It's definitely platform. I'll follow up with Marty about it. That's a draft. Stack build packs. I thought this one would have been merged by now. I guess it's an FCP.
Oh,
Is
same
this ready
thing.
to go?
It's
Cool.
yeah, just needs the
Awesome. And
issues and
then
stuff.
sounds great. And then draft, and offline build pack to RFC. Do we have Dan today?
Yeah.
Ah.
I think there were some naming changes. Emily gave me a lot of feedback. I've changed some stuff. Guess I'll throw it on the sketch.
Awesome. You're going to put this on the agenda? Yep. Sounds good. And does it need any labels? No, it's got labels. Cool. And that concludes our RFC review. Next thing on the agenda is new distribution maintainer announcement.
I am pleased to announce that Travis has been elevated to be a distribution maintainer. So congratulations, Travis. Thank you for all the work you've done so far and all the work you're going to continue to do. It's well-deserved, certainly, in my experience.
Thanks, everybody. I really appreciate all the support. It's been a lot of fun.
Awesome. And then next thing on the agenda is lifecycle configuration file. First RFC we'll talk about. Sorry.
Let's see. I think this is the window. Yeah. Yeah, I went over this a couple weeks back, a few weeks back now, I guess. Basic idea is I'd like to introduce a configuration file to allow lifecycle to read from there instead of only the environment variables or flags. And this is mostly to allow more dynamic configuration between steps in like a single pod environment like Kubernetes. So you could, have a prepare step that reads Project Toml or reads from the platform itself and, sets up things like log level, whether there's color, cache directories, order paths, things like that. So you might have something that generates the order for a particular project that's being built in a particular container and then writes that to a volume, which is then carried forward to the rest of the lifecycle in a read-only manner. So that's kind of the main concept here. I wasn't aware of the lifecycle TOML file name, so I'm open to suggestions on what this could maybe look like. Maybe cmd/config.toml or something. Yeah, that's basically the gist of this. There was some good discussion before on things like, there's some concerns around having paths in the config because, they may not, it's really easy to kind of do no color and log level. Those make sense. But having something like an order path, having something that writes a path for a future step could be confusing. But the main premise here is to not have to rely on environment variables, which are not, of course, modifiable in a single container environment, like a single pod environment in Kubernetes. So I think we do have to have a solution, and I'm open to any and all comments on how to achieve the result there.
I have a question. Instead of using a configuration file that has sort of a separate mechanism with separate names for consuming that configuration, could you just set the environment variables in the lifecycle process when you invoke the lifecycle? I guess I don't understand the problem with
so
problem tribal with pods.
Yeah, so it is under here, and I think under one of the alternatives or whatever is being able to like source some sort of environment variables before executing. But that does sort of imply a lot about the builder you're executing in a dynamic environment where the builder is chosen completely by the project that's being invoked. So, Project TOML, it's not guaranteed we're going to be running on like Heroku/Buildpacks. It's provided by someone else. That OS, like source lifecycle.env wouldn't work in Windows potentially, right? It wouldn't work in certain OS's distros. And so it's really just making this a lifecycle behavior change instead of trying to put it on the platform to have to execute something in a shell prior to executing lifecycle. And there's also steps in like Tecton, for instance, we run the lifecycle produced images themselves that are Scratch images and don't really have a shell to source things.
So the cross-platform thing is interesting because it would provide a more generic mechanism for invoking the lifecycle. If invoking a executable is very fairly similar across different platforms, this file would be a cross-platform way to specify that information. But to me, you don't necessarily need a shell, right, to set environment variables on those platforms either. Like in Unix, when you invoke a process, you can put them on the command line, just like before the name of the process. In Windows, there's kind of a similar way when you launch processes to do it. I'm not opposed to adding a configuration file for it. I just would want to make sure that the need isn't met by kind of something that's there already before we introduce, all a separate set of names for the same thing. I think on the Buildpack author side, I've seen Buildpacks go back and forth between configuration files and environment variables a lot. And, I think a lot of people are settling on, everything should be configured to the environment, right? Like, because we have separate build time environment variables now, especially.
It's hard to imagine how you would get around setting like a dynamic set of environment variables. So like, for instance, having like a prepare step that sets like the order path. Sometimes you may have an order path that gets configured in the dynamic platform, and sometimes you may not. And so making the command of the following, lifecycle that dynamic doesn't sound like a really approachable option from that platform perspective, for me at least.
Got it. And a configuration file that's just environment variable equal value, like the ones we use that in a few places, right? That happens to work with export. I think we defined for execd, we defined a thing that's just environment variable equals value with quotes around it. That's technically TOML, right? Have you thought about that versus
and that's listed here as well. Sort of the reason it's kind of tossed aside is it felt like a well-defined configuration feels less specific, but I'm also okay with having sort of a, key equals value sort of auto loading from lifecycle, but
not strongly attached to that. This seems okay to me too. I just wanted to dig in a little bit in the interface. My only comment, if we go with the config file thing, is in TOML we use dashes for word separation everywhere, and using underscores up there. So
I used it so that you didn't have to like guess how to convert them as much, because normally we have like CNB underscore order underscore path. And so now you'd have to, I guess, kind of have to already know to drop the CNB. But yeah,
Yeah,
I'm not too.
I suggested mapping them to the lifecycle flags, which would be hyphenated, but in some cases, like it would be app instead of apter.
Yeah.
But that might also be. I don't know. Actually,
There's also
I
some
guess those are a little
configuration
bit.
that's probably not from that isn't always from flags as well, right?
Yeah.
We have flags as a way to specify all these too. So it's like 3 ways now.
Is this mostly about sort of taking values from Project TOML and providing them to the lifecycle?
That is one of the main drivers for me. Yeah, I'd say that's the main driver right now.
Like more generally, like do you see this as something that might be output from a prepare phase that took Project TOML and potentially other things as input, and then use this as sort of the internal communication between prepare and the other phases?
Yep.
Okay.
I was sort of wondering if we just want the life cycle to read Project TOML, right?
Yeah.
Directly, rather than defining a new input to the life cycle. But of course, because Buildpacks can modify the apter, if some of those values are necessary after the build phase, the lifecycle might need to copy them into a file to preserve them. So the exporter can still read them in case the Project TOML got deleted by a build pack during build.
Yeah, this also gives you a chance to go ahead. I say this also gives you a chance to merge potentially a platform opinion with a Project TOML.
Yeah, you can also inject this
you could do that
phases as well. Like you might decide to change something because of platform specific reasons. You might need to change like the apter and caster between different phases or something
Yeah, I wonder if the platform specific ones can just use the environment variables, because it has that as its disposal. It'd only be if like you had some dynamic combination of Project TOML and platform that this would start to matter. I wonder if we need a use case for that before we'd want to introduce a new thing here.
I feel like it's pretty common to have those 3 mechanisms, like flag, mvar, and then a config file somewhere. Like even if you think about pack, right? Same thing. Well, I don't know if it supports any mvars, but a lot of CLI tools have the flag, a dot something in your home directory, and then override anything with a mvar. So in that sense, it feels good.
Sorry, I was going to say, I think even the nvars is a little bit less common, right? So typically you would have the flags, and then you would have a single nvar that points to a config file that has all the configuration in it. I could think of at least Kind and I think kubectl that do it that way. There's not a environment variable for every possible option in the configuration file.
Yeah, a platform deciding to switch, log level based on, maybe something that's in a specific, enterprise file or something to change the log level for this deployment or this build or whatever. Same with no color. These things, I don't know that Project TOML is not going to be the place that they maybe specify that, right? I don't really know.
I guess
that
I
might
could
come from the platform itself, but
yeah. I mean, the advantage of doing it in Project TOML, even things like log level, maybe not no color, is that it would sort of just work across platforms if someone added it, right? It wouldn't rely on a prepare step that we would then have to either specify so it's everywhere, or in the time being wouldn't be everywhere in order for this to take effect. Like if we started by saying if you detect will read the group out of Project TOML and you use that instead of order if it's present, with some precedence, like that probably we'd have to think about whether that takes precedence over the flag versus over the environment variable, stuff like that.
What about things like cacher, right? I would think that cacher would be more specific to the platform and not something that you
It probably
have
would
at the
be. Yeah, I just put it
project
here as like an example. Order pass, the one that I mostly have in mind, and being able to do, log level or something like that is a bonus. But order path is the one that I'm currently fumbling with because I pretty much have to create a known location and then grab it from the builder. But I wasn't planning on running in the builder to begin with to like figure out this. So I have to like preemptively figure out what builder they're going to use and pull in their order toml if they didn't specify Buildpacks in their project toml, so that they get the defaults basically. Yeah, it's mostly, I think file-based makes sense in the Kubernetes world. So I think we need to do something that can be brought forward in volumes. I'm not convinced that nvars will be able to work in like a Tecton environment where you don't really have a chance to alter the upcoming commands in a way. I don't think that's always going to be sufficient. So I think a config file would be great. And I think a prepare thing for lifecycle is inevitable. It's basically what I'm already building here, is something similar to that right now. And so hopefully we can look at that in a C&B project lens at some point.
In that case, that would be an alternative, right?
Yeah.
And I guess is that something
Yeah, I
that we
should
want to
list that here.
explore further before this?
The prepare, you mean?
Yeah.
I mean, I don't know if scope creep is the right word, but like, I would worry that this solves a specific problem, and I worry that if we just keep expanding, it's going to turn into stack packs.
There's definitely going to be a pretty big change, right? Because it's not just looking at what's there. You got to like download build packs and figure out how to carry those forward to the next steps potentially. Things like that, or because it's basically building
Ignore
pack as a
files
pre-step.
Yeah, and ignore, exclude, or exclude, include is the one that scares me.
Yeah.
I'm definitely open to the idea that we need a config file. But it does add like one extra layer of indirection or complexity when you're talking about if inputs come from project toml, environment variable, or flag, or this, like what order of precedence you want to do it in. And I don't think that extra complexity is probably necessary complexity. But I would like to have it elaborated why it's necessary and why we couldn't just, to solve the immediate problems now, have the lifecycle read project toml for like the specific use cases that matter now, because that might be simpler and something we would want it to do eventually anyways.
Okay. Yeah, I'll look forward to
sense?
to some of these comments on here as well, just to make sure it doesn't get lost in translation. But yeah, I mean, I'm not stuck on a config file, just looking for a solution. So if there's a solution that doesn't need a config file, I think that's totally fine.
I think I'm less convinced that the lifecycle should read Project Toml directly, because I kind of view Project Toml as associated with the platform more. It's like something Pack implements, but that not everything implementing cloud native build packs would necessarily have to support, especially because it's an extension. Although I'm not opposed to that being the eventuality. I do think on the topic of order of precedence, it's going to be weird if the configuration file isn't lowest priority, because environment variables and flags almost always override specified configuration and things. And I don't know if that causes a problem if you're thinking about containers where the environment variables may already be set. But that'd be a weird UX gotcha to think about.
Yeah, I think I put prioritize order would be the nvar and then the lifecycle toml, and then the defaults that are built in to the lifecycle itself. So yeah, envars still take precedence.
Cool.
And some of these environment variables kind of come set on the builder.
Yep.
In a lot of cases. To your point, Stephen, about not being sure that lifecycle should read Project Toml. Like, I do get where that is coming from, but I feel like if it doesn't read Project Toml, it's going to read another foo.toml file that contains all the same things that Project Toml does, like eventually anyways, or you'll just turn Project Toml into 4 different tomls. So, and you'll need a prepare step to transform it. Then I sort of wonder, like, at that point, like, instead of just copying it over to another file that has a different name, like, we could just read it in detect. And then if we're going to lose that data at any point anyways, we already have contracts for passing data between lifecycle phases. And the good thing about that is it's not, because it's lifecycle, the lifecycle doesn't affect users as much if it changes.
I'm not strongly opinionated about this, but I think my gut feeling is something like we should try to reduce complexity in the lifecycle, or we should be very wary about adding complexity to the lifecycle. And to me, adding a different way of specifying the same set of values is not very much complexity. It's, you know, a different interface. Yeah, there's some new names, but the names are all mapped one-to-one across. But having a lifecycle understand this other invention, right? You know, it's not a concern about how important that invention is. It's a concern about, it's an architectural concern, right? Having a lifecycle understand this other construct, right, is adding some complexity in there because it has to know about this file. If the file changes in the future, we decide to make, you know, changes to how Project Toml works, then lifecycle has to know about it, right? I worry about that coupling, I guess. And if we can avoid that by having.
Does that concern extend to like a lifecycle prepare phase that would also potentially be an extension that encapsulates all of the things you just described? Is that in the same bucket as what you're concerned about? Or are you concerned about like each phase knowing about Project Toml exclusively?
If there's a lifecycle prepare phase that has to know about, if the lifecycle prepare phase is the only thing that needs to know about Project Toml, I guess, to do a build with the lifecycle and it translates that into the other properties, I think I'm okay with that, if that makes sense.
Yeah,
So
that's
why is
why
is that materially different from detect phase being the only one that has to know about it? Right? Like, what's the difference there?
you don't have to use prepare, but you have to use detect.
Yeah. You could completely opt out and not run prepare at all, I think is what Steven's saying.
Yeah. I don't consider prepare core lifecycle, I guess, for whatever reason.
Yeah, I think
Not the real life cycle.
Architecturally, the core life cycle. I'm not talking about the importance of any of the components, if that makes sense.
I
Yeah,
feel
I
like
mean,
one
technically it
extra
could be.
phase
Sorry, go ahead.
is also more complexity in a different way, right? Like one more container to run.
But I feel like that phase needs to exist regardless, whether it's lifecycle prepare or the Tecton prepare container that I can't remember exactly what it does, but I think it like sets permissions or something, right? So I feel like it depends on the platform, but inevitably there is some setup step in most cases.
And like, would creator do prepare? Because now we've gone from like our one container wonder to a 2 container thing. And if it does, then is it really optional?
Well,
you know?
Yeah, I mean, that's a good question. I don't know. I mean, creator is so weird.
Creator, to me, creator is this nice interface into the lifecycle that does everything, right? And so to me, creator does do prepare. It's like that's the user-facing thing where we're admitting, yeah, we're going to put some platformy stuff in here, right? And so
doesn't it get weird if creator's taking all these flags in and then like it reads a Project Toml that like undoes all those flags or something? Like I don't know. It gets kind of weird. Like right now, it just sort of like shuttles those flags down to the other steps, and now you've got a step that's its whole job is to set up the other steps as well.
I think the creator interface is just the information that you need to run everything, including prepare, right?
I was going to propose that prepare, given that it may be platform specific, right, could be more or less a platform concern, right, or a platform team concern and not so much a life cycle concern. And it's more or less the adapter between, a specific platform and the life cycle. So it solely transforms information from one to the other.
Yeah, one thing that I didn't update here that we talked about, just another alternative that I guess I'll list here, is we already have this platform directory, like platform/env that Buildpacks can read from. To Javier's point, if you had something that was its sole job was to read that and set things up, like we could still use invars and then have lifecycle read them from a known files like it does today, but in a different location that is bound by so that you can mount it in with a volume between containers instead of a separate config file. Just to
directory with the names of the environment variables and the contents of their values is just as a complex of a new interface to create as a TOML configuration file in my head, at least. but
it does it makes lifecycle slightly simpler, I guess, because like it's one step to load them all and like I guess I don't know, it's similar, but it's just not another. We already sort of have an interface for the env directory.
Yeah, we don't use that too much at the platform level, right? Yeah. So I think I slightly prefer the TOML, but I don't have a very strong opinion. To me, Javier, you were saying, could this be outside of the lifecycle entirely? And like in my head, where I want to draw the line is like everything that's necessary for creator to do a good, well-supported, standards-based, build from inside of the container, should probably be in the lifecycle, even if those things aren't used by all platforms, right? And I think that's the direction we've kind of started to move. Is like I feel like lifecycle should be something that end users can use. Just talking to a customer that wanted to use lifecycle directly in a particular, circumstance inside of their pipelines, in a way that would be convenient for them. So, like, I feel like
that's where I put the use case. Should be a two container.
Yeah, I think
thing.
once we got creator, right, I think that is where we maybe shifted the line, and it's a lot more optimal. So I agree with that. I think that makes a lot of sense.
How does creator work with exclude and include, like in the long term, right? Like if you're
delete files,
deletes things.
Yeah.
Or it can move the project into a tempter or something like that.
Yeah.
I think extending the run image is something creator is probably never going to be able to do, but like I would say yes, that's right. we're not going to support that in creator. You got to use a more complex platform if you want to do that. I don't know. That's my take, at least. Grain of salt.
That's all I've got.
Yeah, it is. I was going to say we're over halfway through, and we got 3 more RFCs to talk about. Some can probably spill over to tomorrow, but let's jump to. Sorry, go ahead.
Yeah. So for the next one, new Buildpack descriptor keys. This is important for Buildpack registry, so I just wanted to make sure if you have looked at it and had something to say about it, that you have a chance. Otherwise, do take a look at it and give it a vote. I think it's pretty non-controversial, but we'd like to get it into support registry.
Awesome. Do you want to present more about it, or should we move on to the next RFC?
No, I already presented, so I just wanted to get anybody who might have had a chance or might have had something to talk about it. So we can move on if nobody does have anything to say.
Sounds good.
I'll jump in here to tell you I contacted Sam and he says he'll be talking about the survey stuff tomorrow.
Awesome. So we'll put that on the agenda for tomorrow. Next one on the list is offline build packages from Dan. You muted.
All right. Thank you. Yeah, I think that this had a couple of votes to go through, but I got a bunch of feedback from Emily. Most of this stuff was just naming conventions, but there were a couple functional changes that I figured we should go over before, just like make sure everyone that has approved it is okay with these changes. I guess the kind of first one is around the addition of assets to a builder, where formerly this was kind of, you would just specify an asset cache. All of the assets would just be lumped into the builder. Emily suggested that we kind of like add a assets key and then use some of the same information that's present in the like configuration file used to create an asset cache to allow some additional configuration in the builder toml file, so that you just have one file basically, all this config. You don't have to have another config file. Which I think makes sense, especially around some of the pack conventions using just one like config flag. This definitely saves us from breaking that. And the second bit was that builders should be the artifacts that actually provide this CMB assets environment variable, which I think also makes sense. Looks good, but
I apologize for all the bike shitting about names. I'll go back and reread it now.
it makes a lot more sense. There was some like additional like redundant metadata that was just taken out, but that's pretty much all the changes. Just wanted to make sure that looks good. But that's pretty much it. Okay.
Excited to see this one go in finally. It's been a long road.
Really, really happy with where it ended up. I feel like it's gonna be very useful and solve many of the problems I have on a daily basis.
Still think we should do more fancy, layer passing, but
those aren't the problems
can
I
come
have on
later.
a daily
It could
basis.
come later. Yeah. I'm happy with it too. Awesome. Anything else on offline build packages, or should we move on to group additions to builder order? Group additions to builder order. Joe, you want to take it?
Yeah, sure. Share my screen. So this is something that basically this is introducing a mechanism in Buildpack or in Project Toml that would allow Buildpack users to insert Buildpacks to the beginning, middle, or end of the default groups in a builder's order Toml. And the motivation for this was that I've seen it come up in a few places, notably in the Istana Buildpacks, which I think they work with the Google Buildpack, and they recommend using from builder. And that's fine because they work just at the beginning or end. But I've also seen some cases, in particular in my use of Buildpacks, where I want to insert something in the middle of that group. But in every case that I've found, and it may not be every case, but certainly everyone that I've run into, I want that Buildpack to sort of be a companion to another Buildpack. Like if I want something to go in the middle, it usually means I need it to come before some other Buildpack or after some other Buildpack. And that would give me, so anyways, that's why I'm proposing this syntax of before and after for injecting somewhere in the middle of an order. And that would give us the ability to have optional Buildpacks and maybe fail the group if if this one fails and all that kind of stuff. So that's the mechanism for inserting, and then a separate mechanism for inserting at the beginning or end of the group. So that's the pre-Buildpacks and post-Buildpacks, where this could be a list. And that's why it would be separate from the others. And then for pre and post, I can imagine some command line flags that could be used, exactly like the -- Buildpack flag. But for before and after, I think that's too complex of a thing to specify on the CLI, so I didn't propose any CLI mechanism for that. The example that I've got here, aside from the Astana Buildpacks, is the AWS Lambda Node.js RIC, or like runtime interface client. So I built a AWS Lambda build pack that just takes all the build packs and like that it needs, like the Heroku Node.js build pack and whatever, and it creates the multi-meta build pack. But I could also imagine that as a subset of that, there would just be this RIC build pack that includes the interface client, and you might want to insert that after the npm build pack, because if it's a JavaScript function, you need npm in order to install the RIC. So that's just one example that's on my mind. I know there's some others that I'd love to get some that are not my examples too. So if you have others, I'd be happy to put them in here. How it works. Good.
Are you imagining that the before and after would work if you specify a component build pack that's like a child of a meta build pack?
Yeah, like it would. Yeah, I would imagine that it would, because we sort of flatten that list anyways, I think. But yeah, it would, if there was for example, the Node.js one, if there's like I think there is a Heroku Node.js build pack that actually has npm as one of its component build packs, this would be inserted into that suborder or subgroup, or I don't know what to call it. I don't know if we have a term for it.
Currently, it's not implemented by flattening. It's recursive descent. It just keeps breaking them down and following it through, but that doesn't mean we can't, when that ID shows up,
Yeah, but it does something because we don't run the same build pack twice. Isn't there something about that?
There's a map of IDs, I think, that prevents the same build pack from being run twice, but nothing prevents infinite recursion. Don't tell people that you can make your meta build pack reference itself and DOS people's life cycles.
I think we have some restrictions on that, but maybe not at the lifecycle side, but pack does something when creates
nice little
and orders.
reminding us in the lifecycle then.
Yeah.
I apologize. It doesn't mean that implementation can't work with this too. I think the more interesting thing is the UX for it, right? We've actually talked about this a lot on the KPAC side about a DSL for, what does it look like to modify that, existing ordering when you need to replace a build pack with another build pack, or, we came up with a couple of primitives that might be ideas we could feed into the, this RFC also. Mingnu, do you remember? I forget what we came up with exactly. It might have looked very similar to this. You're muted.
Primitive and just theoretical. I think we were a little more interested in replace as opposed to input. I think what we had talked about is like replace this with that.
That's interesting too, and I mean, could be added to this. Pretty straightforward.
Do you have a reason to append in the middle, to do an insertion in the middle, as opposed to only supporting before and after? Because that was a big thing I remember, is we decided that we couldn't think of any use cases for actually putting something in the middle of an existing group versus appending before and after, and it does keep things simpler.
In that, like, if you're using the CA cert build pack, that has to go first. So before, it used to be before and after, but now we have at least one use case, and I can imagine how you would end up with more of the thing you want to run first, and then people want to insert in between the thing that must run first and the other things.
Yeah, we use it for CA certs, but we long talked about the idea that individual platforms would just have sort of a mandated build pack that would always run first to do something.
So in that case, though, there's still a solution that only involves append, which is the user can say, I want to append this build pack, but I know it depends on CA certs. And so they can append CA certs followed by the build pack again, and then everything should just not run the second instance of CA certs, and everything works okay.
But then you have to know about CA certs.
No, you just have to know that the build pack you're prepending needs CA certs. You don't have to know that anything else is going to use it or not, right? And it will just automatically get elided away in the second invocation.
But it's almost certain that you don't know. Your build pack doesn't actually depend on CA certs. Like, we know as build pack authors that you want this thing to be first, but the person adding an additional build pack doesn't know anything about CA certs build pack. They're, adding a Minecraft server. What do they know?
They're adding a Minecraft server to their build, and they don't know that their Minecraft server is going to need CA certs that the person running the build.
They may be
I think
totally
I see it.
unaware of CA certs functionality at all, right?
I think
Like that's the key thing, is like most people don't realize that there are 30 build packs available to them, each of which has its own sort of behavior and what their expected interaction is with those things.
What if instead of trying to figure out orders, it was more about dependency, right? Where in this example about the after NPM, it was depends on Node.js NPM.
Where's Terrence when you need him? He argued this 2 years ago.
Oh yeah, I was going to say, every time someone talks about a build pack dependency, I get a little giddy. I think that's actually kind of what I'm trying to express, and I, went back and forth on after and before and stuff. So I think what you're describing is what, would be a fine alternative, and I would probably work for what I need.
Dependency here scares me a little bit because it seems like a very obvious solution.
Well,
initially,
yeah,
but
depends on.
There's a reason we didn't go. Sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, well, yeah, I guess it depends on being a little bit different than dependency. Yeah. So, but back to do we need something in the middle? I think like the generic case that I'm trying to illustrate here with the Lambda build pack is that this RIC thing is needed by a subsequent build pack, but it's a tool. RIC is a tool, and then but it's installed with npm. So you have this. I need npm, which is already part of the group, and there's a whole bunch of complexity about npm and yarn and whatever, and I don't want to mess with that. But I need that in order to run npm install -g or whatever it is to install the Lambda thing, and then I have another build pack after that that's going to do my Lambda stuff. And so I think generically that's the case where you I need a build pack to install a tool so I can install my tool so that the core thing in my build pack can use all of that.
If the later build pack depends
in my build.
Makes sense. If the later build pack depends on the tool that you're injecting in the middle, why doesn't the later build pack specify that tool in its, why is the later build pack a meta build pack that includes that tool? Is it like an optional dependency?
That is exactly what the Lambda build pack does now, except it also includes the Heroku Node.js build pack. And it could be done where I have this Lambda build pack that doesn't have any knowledge of Node, and then the user has to put it after Node or something like that. I have to think about it more, but I think there are, I can imagine cases you all definitely have the more complex orders, but even with ours where we have 4 or 5 build packs, I'm starting to get inklings that would be necessary, but I don't know if I have a concrete example off the top of my head.
I'm not opposed to extending the existing DSL. I just want to make sure we don't add more complexity than is necessary to meet the use cases, if that makes sense.
Yeah. So there is an option here of just eliminating the before and after stuff and doing the pre and post as this RFC. We could split this in 2. It doesn't have to be the same RFC.
Pre and post to me is very non-controversial because it is the existing contract, right? You can always put stuff before, put stuff after, wrapping the whole builder as, into something that's basically a build package feels very natural, right? So it'd be really easy for me to approve pre and post, but definitely want to make sure we get the right interface in for modifying existing build packages.
Yeah, the reason I started with them together is before we split them, I want to make sure that we think we're okay. I don't if there's a chance that you think pre and post would conflict with some other mechanism we might want to add later, then we might want to think about it holistically. But otherwise, just on its face, if you think, yeah, it's probably fine, they're 2 separate things, then we can probably split them.
That's a very good point. Or there may be an overarching thing. The reason I suspect pre and post are good is that that's an interface that already kind of exists. And so it's hard to imagine not allowing users to do that also. But I could also see us deciding that, well, outside of build packages, we're going to uniformly do things this totally other way, right? If we wanted to. So it's good to bring it up holistically. I agree.
Ever thought about the fact that order toml is basically just a build pack toml without an ID? We basically just have an entry point
Yep.
build pack.
Well, no, no, a build pack toml has to have one group, but order toml can have multiple, right?
Build pack toml can have an order with multiple groups in it.
The difference is that order toml doesn't have to have versions.
No, I'm thinking project toml. I'm thinking project toml, which is this file.
You really model the whole thing as when you create a builder, you get a build pack. It should be named in version with the builder name and version, something like that.
The before after thing is very interesting. Or like, I think we definitely have use cases for replace, right? Like say you don't want to use the standard JDK that comes in your big Java configuration. You want to swap it with your own thing.
We do too.
But for modifying the insides in other ways, I worry about the complexity of that, not the implementation, but in how users might think of it, of this like, recursively expanding thing. And then there's an idea that you can modify stuff in the middle of that, right? With replace, I think it's pretty clear what you're doing there. With the modifying the stuff in the middle, like, I'm not saying that what you have here is wrong. I just, we should.
No, I agree.
Like
when I started putting this example together, it's like, ugh, gross. Like, talk about breaking the abstraction. Like, you have to know about the Node.js npm build pack, and there is definitely an element to this that's icky to me. So
you could replace one build pack with two build packs. You could sort of do the whole thing with replace. You could replace Node.js npm with Node.js npm and something else.
Well, that's clever. Might be a little confusing, but it's definitely one operation that gets you everything.
One operation, right? Yeah.
But in all of those cases, it does sound like that's compatible with this part of the proposal. So I think, just based on this discussion, correct me if you disagree, but like I think I should cut the before after and make this just about pre and post and try to move that forward.
For now, but I'm also okay committing to solving something around before and after. I wouldn't want to take this as we're going to cut those and then think about them way far in the future.
Yeah,
I think there are important use cases there too.
Yeah, it might be.
Not pushing back on implementing something like that at all.
Yeah, for us, it's not a pressing thing. It's just one of those things where I'm like, oh, I know this is going to be needed. If it is pressing for like KPAC or something, we can keep it going.
I don't think we should keep it at this one. And just if you put a note, at the bottom that's like, yes, we do plan to solve these other, part of this is committing.
Or I'll just I can
solution.
just create 2 RFCs and then we just talk about one for 6 months and the other one we merge.
Perfect. Sounds good. All right, we are about at time. Any other comments on this one, or should we call it a day? All right, thanks everybody. This is great.